Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I hope this episode finds you feeling resourced wherever you are on your path. So, if you have been listening for some time, you may know that at the start of this year, 2026, I invited one of my brilliant colleagues, who is a fellow astrologer and musician, Mara Smith, to discuss the astrology of 2026. Mara had this genius idea to split the year into 3 chunks of 4 months, inspired by the astrological decans. And I want to share an unedited version of our discussion of the first 4 months of the year from January to April. Now, I know that April has passed, but one of the things that I find so helpful when interacting with astrology is to actually use it in order to reflect on the past. Now that you've lived your experiences, the question is, how did our discussions, our delineations, maybe even our predictions, how did they fare? How closely aligned are my discussion with Mara with your experiences? And are there ways in which listening to us talk about the astrology from January to April, how might it expand and how might it deepen your understanding of your experience during the first 4 months? So as you listen to us, I invite you to reflect on these questions. I also thought to share the unedited fragment here with all of you because, one, I think it's really fun to just kind of listen to us think on our feet. When I was preparing for the full episode at the start of the year, I wanted it to be more digestible, which was why I did the edits. But all the ums and the silences and the ways that Mara and I stumble into our points are, I think, part of the transmission. And two, the second reason why I wanted to do this is I personally, when I'm listening to these conversations or I'm listening to other people talking about astrology, these spaces where the astrologer is thinking can potentially be very enlightening spaces for you to listen to your own knowing bubbling forth from within. And when I was preparing for the episode at the start of the year, I didn't want this to be like a, hours and hours long kind of thing. But I think it's fun for you to maybe potentially listen to the unedited version. Okay, so some topics that Mara and I touched on during this episode were, one, January beginning with the cazimi town feeling, especially with Venus leading the action and meeting the Sun and Mars closely in Capricorn, and how that serves as a very powerful, attention-grabbing opening to the year. We also discussed how the first third of the year is intense, but also clarifying, especially with the Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, and the nodes making contacts with each other, illuminating things that maybe we weren't aware of before, which may be uncomfortable, but is still illuminating nonetheless. We talked about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries being the highlight of the first third of the year, this being a huge threshold moment, shifting the tone energetically from a more watery preparation into a call for direct and fiery action. This time that we are moving into feels more like a go time kind of energy. There's less rehearsing and more doing, even if the doing feels imperfect or blurry at first. And finally, we talked about how 2026 started out with a sense of how structures that we've built in the past, both external structures and internal structures, or maybe even a sense of rule that we have for ourselves and our relationships, are really being challenged and being rebuilt rather than simply continued from 2025. We talked about the contrast of how 2025 really kind of felt like a continuation of the previous year, but 2026 marks a departure. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you find something useful for your process as you are listening to this. Can you talk a little bit more, Mara, before we get into the first third? Um, yeah, your thought process, because when I got that reading from you, when I got that consult, you had broken down the year into like three pieces or like three acts, is what I'm thinking about it in my mind, like an opera. And inspired by the decans, I'm curious, I know you've been doing readings, like what have you found about this division of the year into three? Because I think the framework that many of us are used to is maybe thinking about it in terms of quarter, which I think is like kind of a corporate carryover. Um, but what have you found in your experience? I guess I have a couple questions here. One is, what have you found about dividing the year into three? And also, um, what kind of motivated that? Like when you think about the philosophy behind the decans and the idea or even the energetics behind it, like how has that shifted how you look at the Gregorian calendar year?
Well, thank you for that question. I arrived at this 4-month approach through the annual perfections
Mm,
technique. And uh, not long after discovering that technique, I just found it to be really powerful in terms of kind of mapping out or scoring out just all time, like, but mostly through the perspective of a solar return. And so I do also still think that there's like a lot of value in looking at things in a quarterly way, but the inspiration came from taking an entire year as a perfected segment of time, and then thinking, well, if anybody is going through a given year uh and looking at the entire 30 degrees of a zodiacal sign, when we're looking at the signs just anytime, we are often considering decans
mm,
and these 10-day windows of time. And so I kind of just like zoomed out and thought about it in terms of like, well, if we're looking at a season and breaking this season down into the first, second, and third decan, there's something that makes a lot of sense to me in looking at a year and then also breaking it out into these equal segments of thirds. And so that led me to the 4-month um, window of time.
yeah.
And then as I start playing with that, I mean, I don't think when I started doing that, it was so conscious, just working with my own chart and my own perfection cycles. But as I start talking to other people, and looking at the windows when they would start those 4-month windows, these patterns of um, really significant shifts started kind of emerging. Um, And so it continues to be interesting to note like how sometimes the shifts are really drastic and obvious. Like getting in a car accident, like right on the new window beginning, or getting a new job or losing a job. Like these are
Hmm.
the sorts of things that people have been telling me about. And so yeah, I have just taken note and started paying more attention, because it seems like for a lot of folks, these 4-month windows are lining up in significant ways. So,
Yeah.
um, I just have to give a shout out to my really lovely partner who is uh, in a Microsoft Excel genius and um, helped build a calculator for looking at these windows of time so that it just has become a really easy way to just say like, oh yeah, here we are, this
Hmm.
begins here, this ends here. And that I just have to say, man, I never thought that Microsoft Excel would be like useful in astrology, but it actually has like a lot of features and formulas and stuff that have like incorporated different aspects of the astrological language. So that's been kind of cool to just learn like, oh, corporate life TM has like programming for astrology.
It's being composted into its new form. Hmm.
Love that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I also wanted to bring in something that you had mentioned previously when we met, which was as you divided the year into three parts, you are also kind of placing this awareness of the way we divide um the modalities, right? That we divide the zodiacs into. This idea of seasons beginning with a cardinal sign and then fixed and then mutable. So, each of the three part also kind of maybe not forcing it into this structure, but kind of starting to think about it as, start, middle, and end, right? Beginning, middle, and end. Um, Energy or like arc to it.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that kind of language in because I think it's becoming so second nature to me to like think about it that way that I didn't even like remember to bring in the notion of like, yeah, for any year, that first 4-month period is a cardinal time. The second four-month period has that sort of fixed quality. And then the ending, the last 4 months having that kind of mutable wrapping up quality that feels really, really important. Um, and that kind of triple aspect and the way that it folds in with the modalities, but also with the elements, feels like important to note too, because like as we'll see with 2026, when we're starting each period, we're starting it in an earth sign each time.
Mm.
Um, and it's, if we were dividing into quarters rather than into thirds, we would be looking at not having the same element, but having the same modality instead. So this is just like, I think, along with my kind of interest in zooming in more on the triplicity method and elemental connections between things, like I do think that that's kind of an important part of um, how the method like kind of draws focus to what's important.
Wow, that's really cool actually. Just to double click on that, I think what you were really saying is that if we look at the year divided into 4-month periods, then January starts in the middle of Capricorn season, right? Which is a cardinal earth sign. And then May is kind of, the beginning portion of Taurus season, which is a fixed earth sign. And then September is uh mutable earth with Virgo, right?
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep.
That's really cool.
It is. And like because our Gregorian calendar, is just going to keep doing its thing, I realized moving forward that, like, oh gosh, like the earth element is really always going to be shepherding us into these periods, like moving
Mm,
forward as I look at I don't think this will be my last forecast actually, now that I've started doing this. So, but yeah, that just feels noteworthy that we get to like really orient ourselves on Earth, like, to the Earth element as we are going through these changes and periods.
thank you. Wow, that's really profound. Um, shall we start getting into the first third of the year?
Sure.
Okay. So, yeah, I think maybe I'll just have you start with, is there any transit that kind of feels particularly important during the first third of 2026, that period between January and April, that really kind of stuck out at you?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so, um, yes. The answer is yes. So I just leave it at that. Um, the first thing that really jumps out is the Cazimi town of, January,
Mm,
and the fact that we have this what feels like really intrepid. This is the word for Venus that came up for me this year, is kind of like intrepid. Venus
mm,
is like out in front, meeting everything, making all of these transits and aspects first, often in like a series of planets that will then, come along behind and make have the same conversations.
mm,
Um, and so there's something about Venus going first, I think that's really lovely and helpful and kind of like laying this groundwork and like maybe doing some sweet talking, kind of like trying to get everybody on board for all of these meetings that are going to be taking place.
mm,
And so, yeah, that I think is the first thing worth mentioning, as Venus is going to lead in this cazimi town in January with the sun and Mars all really, really close together.
yeah.
And so
In
there's also
Capricorn,
in
opposing Jupiter in Cancer, right?
opposing Jupiter. Yes.
Yeah.
So in the second decan of Capricorn, um, and each of them, yeah, getting to have this conversation with Jupiter. And so what kind of jumped out to me about this first set of transits is the fact that both um Venus and Mars have dignity in the second decan of Capricorn, so
Mm,
within two different systems. So I guess I'll just introduce the idea right now of, with decans and with decanic dignity and looking at their rulers, there's a couple of different systems. One being the one of descending order, and then the other one being the triplicity method.
mhm.
Huge nod to Austin Coppock and 36 Faces. And yeah, I just ate that book up. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting that in one system of decanic rulership, Mars has that rulership of the second decan of Capricorn, but then in the other system of triplicity, like Venus has it. So
Mm,
they are both in this kind of place where they have some special skill, even if it's not um like in Venus's case, it's not something that we think about or talk about a whole lot. But I definitely do feel with Venus's connection to the earth element through Taurus that like, yeah, there's a lot to kind of for Venus and Mars to talk about in this conversation with the sun that they're having so closely together. So,
yeah.
and then there's like something about Jupiter being in Cancer and opposite to all of this that made me think about the way in which like water makes Earth more malleable. So it's like Jupiter kind of like adding this moisture and helping the conversation through,
Mm.
and be more productive just by kind of giving a little bit of moisture in this otherwise like somewhat dry environment. So all of that felt really significant to me. I'm curious to hear what you if you thought about those that transit, or like yeah, what comes up for you.
Yeah, I feel like with that transit, it makes me think about what I even think about when I think about cazimi, like how I conceptualize cazimi. To me, cazimi is kind of like that moment when we're on stage and we're watching a play, and then the spotlight goes into like specific characters, right? That to me is kind of like what the cazimi moment feels like. It's this experience of certain aspects of being alive, or certain themes kind of being highlighted in a really um, major way, right? And another imagery that I've heard different astrologers talk about is um, that kazimis are moments where planets come to the sun's castle, right? Essentially, like the sun is the king. The sun is the king that sits on the throne, and then this planet is coming to visit, right? So then it's getting this royal treatment, just being in close proximity with the sun. And I think what I've noticed in my own practice and working with clients is Kazimi moments have this kind of amplifying energy. Like it kind of amplifies the quality that planet, the non-sun planet, is bringing. For example, if we're talking about Venus, it does bring this, and Venus in Capricorn, bringing this idea of pleasure, beauty, joy, connection, and orientation towards finding endurance in that, right? And I think with the glow of the sun too, it kind of brings in this kind of benediction quality, right? It's kind of like to going up to receive the blessing from the sun. Um, and yeah, I think what I'll add here is January is interesting to me because I always look at what the first transit of the year is. I believe in 2025, the first exact transit that we had was that Mars squaring Pluto transit. And this year, the first um, transit we had is the Sun in Capricorn sextiling the North Node in Pisces. And there's something there to me um, around how like this is kind of a Neptunian year, right? There is, we're gonna, I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but um, there's also the influence of the sun, and
Mm.
this is when, um, wait, I'm getting this wrong. I'm looking at my notes. It's not Neptune. It's the sun in Capricorn sextiling the North Node in Pisces. That's the first transit that we have. And there's something about the influence of the sun being present while, like the 1st of January, the first thing we have is Sun in Capricorn sextiling North Node in Pisces. We have Mercury in Sag squaring Neptune in Pisces, and then Mercury moves into Capricorn. And so there's something here about kind of the influence of the sun, right? And when we're thinking about like sun aspects, they are clarifying, right? They are kind of they show the true nature of something. Like it's literally like putting things out into the light for the sun to, illuminate over the thing, right? So, yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of think about what you mentioned about Kazimi Town in January and how, like, the role that the sun is playing throughout the year.
Mhm. Yeah. The it's so funny. So I've never seen you wearing glasses before.
Is that
Uh,
true?
it really is the first time I've seen you wearing glasses, and it made me think of when you go to, I don't know if you've had this experience when you go get your eyes checked out. They put the drops in and they dilate your eyes. And I've had the really unpleasant experience of them needing to, like, the eye doctor needing to get like a closer look, and so they shine this super bright like a blind, like a truly blinding light, like right in
Yes.
your eye, and then they're like, look at this one point, which is just like painful, but it's like, in a way, the whole point of this is to really eliminate any like problems, or
Mm,
really bring to the surface anything that like needs to be addressed, that you just can't see without like kind of blinding the person that you're trying to learn about. And so that kind of came to mind too as you were talking about like the spotlight, and then also the way there's something uncomfortable about being like having light just so brightly shining on you sometimes. So it's like there's no escape. And so um yeah, this is also a part of the Kazimi story for me, is like it's not always super comfortable, and it's also like something being so brightly illuminated that it's hard to see.
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um, I also want to bring in for the first third of the year, Neptune entering Aries, leaving Pisces for good, and then having that conjunction with Saturn, right? So Neptune entered Aries, Saturn entered Aries, and then they have a conjunction. And I'm tying this to what you were saying about the cazimis, um, because Aries is the exaltation place of the sun. And I think when we're talking about Aries, there's kind of a, yes, martial quality, but solar quality also kind of coming in. Um, to me, this is really like that Neptune Aries conjunction is like the start of a new cycle. You know, Neptune and Saturn has been kind of dancing around each other throughout 2025, but they haven't created this conjunction until 2026. And um, yeah, I feel like there's this theme of, Saturn and Neptune moving out of the meta land of Pisces into the action land of Aries, right? Um, I want to bring in how Neptune in Pisces is such an interesting. I was actually doing a little bit of research around this, and to me, Neptune in Pisces kind of goes so deep into metaland. It likes to really think about ontology. It likes to think about like where things are coming from, right? Not just the answers or the questions, but what is underneath that. Um, Neptune in Pisces was literally a great example of this is Lana Del Rey, who actually released her first video that went viral in 2011 when Neptune entered Pisces. Um, so if you think about Lana Del Rey and this aesthetics of like glorifying kind of the timeless nostalgia energy, that to me was very Neptune in Pisces. Billie Eilish also feels very Neptune in Pisces. Um, Taylor Swift's new album feels very Neptune in Pisces to me. And then, of course, Neptune in Pisces also brought in this revival of the occult, right? Revival of interest in astrology, for example, that we've been seeing, Um, prior to Neptune in Pisces, we didn't have like all these astrology apps that we now have, right? Um, there's been a lot of really great sci-fi shows that came out during Neptune and Pisces, Stranger Things. I recently watched this show called Dark Matter, which is about alternate
Oh,
realities.
it's so good.
It's so good, right?
It's so
Dark
good.
Matter is amazing. I think Dark Mirror, which is another kind of dystopian show. Oh, Black Mirror,
A
is
Black
that what?
Mirror?
Black
Yeah,
Mirror?
Black
Yeah.
Mirror.
It first aired in 2011 as well, when Neptune entered Pisces. So it's really interesting to see like this era maybe kind of wrapping up, and Neptune in Aries is bringing a very different energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, like Neptune in Aries is more about like individual dreams feeding into like the collective well, right? That there's less of this analysis of like what are we all dreaming about, going more into what is your perspective, what is your opinion, what is your genius, and can you really go super far into that and bring something back from your own consciousness, from your own mind, from your own specific preferences, life experiences, trauma, in order to bring solutions to like the greater whole. Yeah, what's coming up for you, Mara? I'm curious if
Wow.
you want to bring in anything into this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot came up for me actually. First off, love that somebody else knows about dark matter. That show's incredible.
So
And
good.
I kind of missed it or whatever when it was happening. So, um, what you were most recently saying about Neptune and the invitation to attend to like the individual dream more so than just kind of like the soup of Pisces. This and along with Saturn too. Saturn in Pisces has made me think a lot about like the architecture of a dream. Like
Mm,
what is like the structuring of a dream and like kind of in a way where I haven't been an astrologer for very long, but it's like having this perspective of Neptune and Saturn together in this space is like I feel really lucky that these two very different planets I'm getting to experience in the same soup of Pisces and then like in Aries. And really like being unafraid to talk about something like the architecture of a dream, which is like maybe very fantastical or almost like silly thing to kind of think about, but there are, I've had the experience of reading about a dream that somebody else journaled about and seeing like even line for line that like I had journaled the very same dream, almost exactly the same. Like,
yeah.
and so with the conjunction, between Neptune and Saturn, sorry, not yeah, Neptune and Saturn, it's in it's in eclipse season. So like that really I thought was fascinating that, we get the first Aquarius eclipse in February.
Yeah.
Um and then we get this conjunction in the period between eclipses, which is just like, oh my gosh, we really are restructuring and like changing direction here. If that conjunction had happened outside of the eclipse window, it would have been really significant anyway. But just um having it there to me kind of speaks to what you were saying in terms of like the Aquarian connection to our own each individual's perspective
Mm,
that you can only really get from zooming out enough to like notice each individual part being like uh, in this tapestry of wholeness, which is definitely like one of those Neptunian keywords of wholeness and like unifying vision. And so um yeah, I do feel like the fact that the first eclipse in Aquarius is kind of a part of the story too of this conjunction, especially because we have like a sextile between Aquarius and Aries. And one of the things that I have really just looking at 2026 um kind of deepened my interest in and my ability to like kind of pick up on is the power of a sextile. Um,
Mm,
like the sextiles are just literally blowing my mind, like the more I kind of consider them. Um, and I think this is like kind of the first place where mentioning that power of the sextile makes sense when we're considering Saturn, Neptune, and Aries here. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I know that sextile is a really it plays a really big role in the second third. But yeah, just to kind of maybe wrap up your point there before we move on to the second third of the year, I I feel like yeah, it's really significant. You're right that the Saturn Neptune conjunction happened in the midst of eclipse season when we also have a Mercury retrograde in Pisces, right? So there's something here about the connection between kind of the individual dreams or the individual experience and the collective. There's something here also about this haze of I wrote this word that came to mind a number of times when I was contemplating this transit actually, which was the haze of action.
Oh my gosh.
And there's something about it's making me think about, you know, if you play like a video game or if you watch action movies, there's always these scenes where there's a lot happening, right? But in the cacophony of what's happening, you're it's kind of hard to make sense of things while it's happening. You know, it's going to take time later on to maybe revisit that window and to really make sense of it. And I feel like that's kind of the vibe that we are working with in the first third of the year. And not to kind of jump ahead, but I do feel like there's something here about like really just collecting all the data and doing your best to log them, you know, and then to later in the year maybe come back to it and see what the personal significance of that is. Because I do feel like there's a correlation between like how everything is shifting, moving into like new territory in the first third of the year, and there's potentially it's like you can't really see what's happening when you're in the escalator. You know, you're just like going up, right? And then later you can think about, oh yeah, what was my experience there? You know, what smells can I remember? Like what is how is this impacting my personal life? But I think the first third of the year is probably going to bring, yeah, a lot of collective stirrings, you know,
Mhm.
and as someone who really likes to try to make sense of situations, I feel like it might be important to remember, especially if you are kind of someone who is contemplative and who likes to ruminate, that like the first third of the year is maybe not really where there's a lot of potency for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, it feels like the clarity will arrive in moments where you're like, "Oh, I thought I knew it was happening, but boy, like now I know I really had no idea."
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know, at least there's that to look forward to. And like I feel like there's things are going to clear up
Hmm.
and there feels like some gratitude for that, even if what we start seeing more clearly doesn't look pleasant or feel pleasant. At least, you know, having the sort of like film dissolve,
Yeah.
uh, is there's something constructive to come out of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I have been thinking about Saturn and Aries as the anti-hero archetype. Um, what comes to mind is, for example, the movie Watchmen, which came
Mhm.
out. It was based on a graphic novels, and it's basically about these superheroes that are really flawed. People who aren't really altruistic. It's very clear in this movie that they have their weaknesses, they have their obsessions, they have their kind of manic quality, and Saturn and Aries kind of has that energy to me. Um, and it's not about like orienting to perfection, but it's about trusting in the momentum of kind of what is propelling us forward, and yeah, another phrase that comes to mind is like imperfect actions, right? Like taking imperfect actions, um, temporary structures, I think are also very much like the vibe for Saturn and Aries. As
Mm.
the old is kind of dissolving and we're moving into the new, we're going to necessarily create structures that aren't going to last, right? And not worrying too much about whether this is going to endure and maybe more about does this serve the purpose for now, knowing that it's going to be replaced later on.
Well, yeah, that that feels really powerful. I got the image of like a fence, an iron fence or something that is, once we get Saturn and Aries and like the fence is there, it's gonna get really hot. It
Mm,
may even get destroyed, but like it will like serve its purpose, for some time,
yeah,
even if it's yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um, is there anything else you want to say about the first third of the year before we move on, Mara, that
Um,
feels important?
let's let's see. Just let's see. There was something about the Saturn Neptune uh cazimi. So they're going to have this cazimi as well and in Aries. So it's like, yeah, we're doing this new thing. You're receiving your assignments like in Aries here.
Yeah.
It's not happening in Pisces where we've been for so long. And this is, let's see, late March. One thing that struck me was that while when this cazimi takes place, Venus will also be in Aries and will actually be in a place of dignity too, like in that third decan of Aries, um, which I think there's something coming up about how like neither Venus nor Saturn and probably Neptune are super comfortable. Like Aries is not a place where they're stoked or just like super using the tools at their disposal that feel most comfortable.
Totally.
Um, but there's like a way in which Venus is there kind of helping to um I guess kinda helping, like, accept this new role, like, in this place. It makes me think of the tarot card, like, the 4 of Wands, where Venus is here in Aries, and the name of the card being completion,
Mm,
in some systems, and so it's like, yeah, really confirming that, like, yeah, we've kind of closed out this other cycle, and, like, Venus is here, like, "Okay, we're on fire, but, like, we're just gonna keep moving forward."
yeah. Yeah. The imagery that came to my mind as you were speaking, and I'm looking at the chart here, is dried fruits, actually. Like dried fruits as a metaphor for this specific transit. Because if you look at that lineup, right, the only planet that really is comfortable being in Aries is the sun, right? And it's literally like, if you think about Venus, as being related to like fruits and like goodness, or Neptune as being related to the ocean, it's kind of like you put out all your fruits and your jellyfish, like you take it out of the ocean and you just put it all out to dry, right? Um, there's something about like, yeah, there's something very drying to this transit. I feel like, and it also is worth bringing back your earlier point about how these Saturn Neptune conjunctions have been happening in Pisces, right, in the previous year, and how in Pisces that conjunction almost feels like moist and it kind of amplifies maybe this dreamscape or like the emotional landscape. And then in Aries, it's like almost the opposite of that, right? Like
Mhm.
there is, I think, a squeezing out of like all this excess water that's been, all this excess liquid that's been in the organism's body. Like the collective mind, the imagination, the structures. Um, it actually also is making me think about like, I know this has a specific connotation for those of us living in the US politically, but it's making me think about the idea of draining the swamp. Like there is kind of a draining of the swamp that, detach from the context in which it's used, right? If we think about the idea of draining the swamp, it's literally like taking out all the excess that's been festering in it, right?
Mm.
It's like taking out of this, um, yeah, like taking out of these material from the collective ocean and like really seeing if we it can survive on land.
Wow. The fruit has been like salted. It's like dry and salty. Like, is it edible? We will find out. I
We
don't know
will
if it's
find
edible
out.
or not. Yeah, I feel like we're gonna find out. Yeah, we will. That clarity, like next year, is
Hmm.
coming. Yeah, lots
Yes.
of clarifying events. Especially with like one of the things that I think happens in this first decan, this first 4-month period is like Uranus moving into Gemini,
Yeah.
um, which I don't have any great desire to like talk about it with regard to the United States at this point. It's just kind of already out there, but I think that's part of it too.
Yeah.
But that's a significant thing that we didn't really talk about happening in this first period, but it's huge.
Well, I hope that was interesting, and I hope you had some realizations that maybe you didn't catch the first time you were listening to this. And as always, I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment if you are listening on Spotify, or leave a review if you're listening on Apple Podcast. And you can also share this episode on social media with your thoughts. I read every single comment and I appreciate the ways that you show up here energetically. And if you want to connect with Mara, you can do so by following her on Instagram or Substack at Lizzie's Griffs. Mara also has a podcast that has since launched since this episode aired the first time at the beginning of 2026. So I invite you to connect with her. I will be sure to include all of her links in the description below. I'm sending you so much love, and I look forward to connecting again very soon. Take care.